When the Russian counteroffensive at Stalingrad began in November 1942 and Paulus's Sixth Army found itself in a cauldron, no one here believed it would last. Soldiers were about to go on vacation, and some had not yet returned. Our firing positions were by the church, and the guns looked toward the Valda. There was a good view of the Valda. On clear days we could see the Russians deploying artillery in their positions. Our forward observation post was in a ravine not far from the Valda, and the enemy was sitting literally 15 meters away. Since everything was visible, it was possible to move only along the communication passages, which were under constant mortar fire. When the ring of encirclement closed, our battery was constantly shaken up. All those deemed unnecessary were sent to positions along the river as infantry. On December 18th came an order stating that all but the most essential material was to be destroyed, and we with 2 guns were to move south, where our tanks would gather and go to the breakthrough, towards the 4th Panzer Army coming towards us. But soon this order was cancelled. In early January, the front along the Volga was a relatively quiet place. Shells were scarce, and we could fire only at recognized targets and only after special permission. No more than 3 shells were allowed to be fired at a target. At this time the Russians could fire from the other side of the Volga on an individual man as a whole battery. The weather was snowy, with heavy frosts up to 30 degrees below zero. It was perfect weather for the enemy aircraft hanging in the sky all day. Our hospital was crowded with wounded. It had a red cross on a white background, but Russian bombers approached the hospital and razed it to the ground. The fighting on the steppe was approaching the outskirts of the city, and wounded soldiers and tramps flocked to the ruins. The wounded and lost soldiers ate nothing for days. On January 28th the Russians reached the Volga south of us, and we no longer had communication with that side. On January 29th we divided our remaining valuables and food in a fair way. The next day our tank drove down the street and fired on the enemy infantry. When the Russians spotted it, they opened fire with all their artillery, destroying both the tank and our command post in the process. After all our top officers were killed, there was no point in continuing to fight any further. On the morning of January 30th, we went to surrender as prisoners. Having fired all our cartridges and rendered our weapons unusable, we surrendered on January 30th, 1943. When we reached the enemy positions, the forward units treated us to cigarettes and cigarillos from our own depots captured earlier. They took nothing from us. With the words "war kaput, soon home," all the prisoners gathered in a column and moved south, accompanied by a single escort. When soldiers and civilians tried to rob us, they were driven away by our escort's automatic rifle. When he was replaced after about 1.5 kilometers, everything was the same with the other escort. But when they changed him too, a great raid began, in which everyone took part. They took everything we had. Everything we could see. We got to the southern freeway and took the road. On this road we were overtaken by Russian motorized units, and those who did not have time to bounce back were crushed. After a few kilometers the road turned to the railroad to Stalingrad. Here, in the switchman's booth, we were given food. We were given a loaf of bread for each 8 men, and a salted herring for each. In this way we were fed for 8 days. When we returned to the road, a Russian detachment was already waiting for us. The last belongings were taken from us, and several comrades even had their boots taken off. And they stood on the snow barefoot, in the frost of -30. In the evening we reached the Beketovka camp, and we were assigned to houses without windows, with earthen floors. Since they took away our blankets, we slept in the cold, on the frozen ground. The worst things happened in the camp because of hunger. There were 2 trucks that took out the dead every day. There was a kitchen in the camp, but what was cooked there was not enough for so many prisoners, so if you ate once a week, you were lucky. At the end of February we were loaded onto a train. There were about 100 people in each car. There was a hole cut in the floor for discharging natural needs, and in the corner there was a stove with a few logs in it. To fit them into the stove, Pieces of wood had to be chopped with a crowbar. As food, each one received 2 slices of bread and salted fish. But there was nothing to drink during the whole journey. When the train made a stop, those who had died during the journey were taken out and piled up in the snow. At the final stop of our route, we were unloaded and divided into 2 camps. Those who could not walk were taken to the camp on sleds driven by Russian women. The women were civilian prisoners and were sitting in another camp not far from us. Typhus, dystrophy, and dysentery killed many. In the first weeks, almost no one was able to work. There was no doctor in the camp, only a Russian nurse who was helpless in the face of all these dying people. In March, one of the camps was closed and the survivors were transferred to us. In September 1943, our camp was also closed. We were transferred to Volsk. 70 able-bodied people and 150 sick. That was all that was left of the 2,000